Could Microsoft have bluffed their way to success with the Xbox One? Sony's 2005 E3 presentation wasn't a reflection of what developers could actually achieve with the PS3, but it successfully cemented in the public's mind that the PS3 would be the most powerful console of its generation. When games actually shipped on the PS3, the results were often far less impressive than what the Xbox 360 can do. Yet those real-world results did little to move public opinion that the PS3 was the most powerful machine on the market. Could Microsoft have adapted this strategy with the Xbox One? Is there a scenario where Don Matvick could have said the Xbox One was the most powerful console of that generation and proved it by showing pre-rendered fake demos framed as real gameplay? Perhaps he could have claimed Xbox tech superiority by pointing to the cloud, which actually, John, they did do. ESRAM, or even the second GPU hidden in the power brick. So on the one hand, John, the concept of bluffing your way to success, I don't think it's going to happen or would have ever happened. I think there would have been major legal ramifications. But at the same time, that Sony 2005 E3 presentation does exist. It did, at the time, completely blow Microsoft's presentation out of the water, but at the same time, there were dissenting voices saying, come on, guys, this isn't real.
Come on, lads.
Lol. What do you think? But what do you think about this?
Oh, man, I don't think they could have done it specifically because of the PS3 scenario, right? Right. Sony kind of... It's actually twofold. There's a couple things. First of all, the PS3 scenario had already happened. People wisened up to this. Second, we'd already had plenty of quote unquote bull shots, sort of these fake demos along the way. And I think right around the time of Xbox One and PS4, there was also the very recent memory of stuff like the Watch Dogs demo, which people were already starting to become skeptical of because when they showed the game again, it was suddenly way less good looking. And like, wait, what happened here? But the big thing I think is that PS4 and Xbox One launched at the same time, whereas Xbox 360 and PS3 did not. And right away, because they launched at the same time, the comparisons would be out there, and Microsoft couldn't really prevent that. You had a lot of those, like, people would have seen it right away. Like, I remember when the news first started coming through, like, wait, Battlefield's like 720p on Xbox, Call of Duty 720p on Xbox, and it's higher res on PS4. Like, the second that starts happening, like, any narrative that they could have tried to spin up would have been shot down, and it probably would have reflected even worse on them at that time, because I don't think the power was the big concern when the Xbox One was revealed, right? Like, I think people didn't even know. Like, they just kind of assumed when it was announced that it was going to be similar to PS4.
Right.
And it was more all the strategy around the games, the TV stuff, the game sharing stuff, like all of that stuff is what blew up the Xbox for them. That's what caused the problems. So it was never really a thing about power. It's just that the power thing ended up becoming more of an issue once the systems actually launched and the Xbox cost more than PS4. That was not a good look for them at the beginning, and that definitely stuck.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some thoughts about this, but I'm curious to hear yours first, Oliver.
Yeah, like you mentioned, they kind of did with the cloud stuff a little bit with that Crackdown 3 Destruction demo, quite famously. That kind of did end up looking, that was a bit of a faked demo, so to speak, or at least it did not materialize in the finished title. But I don't think they could really bluff their way to success because it was such a similar console to the PlayStation 4 in so many ways, and it was immediately obvious that it was weaker. Like John said, right away in that early software, I don't really think they had a compelling story to tell in terms of, here is a special technology that differentiates our hardware. Here is a reason, like Sony with the Cell, famously, right, that our console could deliver a better experience. And that was pretty evident from the jump, especially when they were emphasizing things like having terrestrial TV pass through and functionality like this and connect. They were not really talking so much about GPUs and power bricks and cell processors and things like this. But in the end, it's interesting you bring up the PS3 because in the end, I think Sony did achieve some very competitive looking titles, some incredible looking titles in that generation of console hardware. But I think largely in part because they had a really good first party stable of development studios that spent a lot of time trying to extract as much performance as possible out of the cell to bring it up to closer to parity in some respects with the 360, which was probably a superior hardware design. And Microsoft did not have that large first-party contingent of software, with the exception of a few titles like the Forza games and like, Gears of War 3 titles like that. So in the end, on that generation of console hardware, Sony did achieve a good result, albeit much less compelling than those initial, MotorStorming Killzone 2 demos and whatnot. But just through having, I think, a really strong set of partners to develop console software on.
I mean, to answer the specific question, could Microsoft have bluffed their way to success with Xbox One? The answer is no. If you go back to the context of the time, even before the machine was actually revealed, the specs were widely leaked. And, ultimately you looked at them, you compared them to the PlayStation ones, and, well, what could you say? It was the same architecture and a smaller GPU on the Xbox side. And there's the whole question of what's going to happen with the ESRAM, stuff like that. And it wasn't looking good. Secondly, there was kind of leaks of developer sentiment where they weren't particularly happy with it. They were happy with the PlayStation 4. Again, similar things kind of happened with Series there. But then we had the reveal where it was probably one of the most calamitous marketing exercises of all time, where, ultimately, they didn't have answers to very simple questions, particularly about how the, game sharing was going to happen, or, the concept of what you're actually buying when you go to a shop. What value does the disc have? If it's actually tied to a digital license. They didn't have good answers for that. And then secondly, there was the whole presentation itself where they didn't focus on games primarily. It was focusing on the Xbox as essentially a multimedia station, right? It did games, it did TV, it had the Kinect camera as a kind of brand new input device. And all of those approaches just didn't resonate with gamers. And to be fair to Sony, they just doubled down on games and producing a technology that makes it easier for developers to get access to all of the horsepower. They had a much bigger GPU, they had much better memory bandwidth. But otherwise, it was very similar to the Xbox. But they, obviously they did have those first-party developers focusing, concentrating on that hardware. It paid off big time. And I was just thinking back actually, John, to that Battlefield press event. It was quite funny because, Tom was there and on site. He'd figured out that it was 720p on Xbox and 900p on the PlayStation. And it was quite funny that a lot of the influencers were coming up to him saying, yeah, it doesn't look quite as good on the Xbox. What's going on? But he didn't let on to anyone. But people could tell the difference, right? That's the key point. So they couldn't have bluffed their way to success with Xbox One. What they did do is regroup, and they came up with Xbox One X, which was by far the best console of that generation. And ultimately, when you look at what Xbox One X is doing, it's a repeat of the PlayStation 4 formula. It's, huge GPU, no crazy ESRAM stuff going on there, just fast, GDDR memory. Yep. And it was a massive hit. They doubled down on 4K when 4K was actually a meaningful difference. You could have anything up to a 5 times increase in resolution between 1X and One software. It was better than the PlayStation 4 Pro in just about every sort of quantifiable metric. It was pretty great. So, yeah, you can't really bluff your way to success, I don't think, anymore, as amusing as the conceit is. But at the same time, I am thinking about how, marketing can be quite successful. That E3 presentation, it was kind of wildly debunked. And by 2006, when the actual PlayStation presentation arrived at E3, there were obvious issues with it. I think it's fair to say. yeah, what can I say? You couldn't really do that this day and age, I don't think. But I do think there was that perception, definitely from the Cell, that the Cell was providing something that we'd never seen before in terms of performance. And even now, a lot of ex-PlayStation 3 developers kind of really miss it and its approach from a certain perspective. And in terms of the way marketing cuts through, obviously, the claim was shot down in flames, but I'm just thinking back to that CES from NVIDIA where they said that the 5070 is as fast as a 4090, had 4090 performance. It obviously didn't check out. The reviews comprehensively demolished that claim. But at the point the claim was made, you could see people were picking up on it and repeating it. And, I'm just wondering how effective that was. It's an interesting sort of thing about the power of marketing there.